The first and only time I got to visit the Vatican was on my honeymoon with my wife. We were part of an English-speaking tour that had visited quite a few different Catholic landmarks over the course of the tour, and as a result had been subjected to quite a few disparaging things claimed about the Catholic Church, this new religion that I had only recently adopted at this point. So by the time we reached St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, I had anticipated that a particular remark would be heard from at least one of the other members of our tour group. And the reason I expected it is because it's something of a cliche among those who insist on seeing the church through a lens of antagonism rather than openness and at least tolerance. So the remark was, look at all this opulence. Think about how many poor people they could have helped instead of building this. And if the sample size of my tour group was any kind of indication, it probably tells us that this sentiment can be found in just about any small sample of English-speaking people, which means it probably resonates with a lot of people. And honestly, the immediate irony of the person saying this was still somewhat surprising to me, even though I expected to hear something to this effect. Let's just start by admitting that St. Peter's Basilica is one of the most laudable achievements in human art, design, engineering, and frankly, I would say just guts to get something like that made. It's one of the most beautiful buildings in the world, and it's overwhelming when you're actually able to stand in its presence. So yes, it took a significant investment of resources and time to complete St. Peter's Basilica. But when people make this criticism, I can't help but question the sincerity of it, especially when it's someone who stood in line to get in to see it. If you're so indignant about the moral compromises it took to create this masterpiece of art and design, then why are you there viewing it and enjoying it? Why are you endorsing it and lending credibility to one of the purposes for which it was created? It was so that people would come from around the world as pilgrims to come and visit it. The fact that he was there touring it, taking pictures of it, probably buying souvenirs, shows that he has some measure of appreciation for the fact that it exists at all. And this was no small effort on his part either. He flew halfway around the world to see it, just like I did. You wouldn't catch me, or probably most people, doing that to see like Oprah's house or something like that. Because there's a very clear difference. Oprah's house, or one of her houses, is built for one person, or at least a very select, exclusive group of people to enjoy. It's a monument to exclusive personal wealth. St. Peter's Basilica, on the other hand, is built for all people to come and see, which is why and how this particular individual was able to stand under its pillars and make sardonic comments about it with impunity. And for the person who made this vocal complaint to the rest of the tour group deliberately so that everybody could hear him, as someone who is obviously positioning himself as a champion of the poor, so thoroughly invested in their cause, I find it surprising that over the course of his laboring for their benefit, he somehow escaped being confronted with the fact that the Catholic Church does more to care for the needs of the poor than any other organization on the planet. And yet, this is the first accusation that comes to mind for him when visiting the landmark that sits at the heart of the Catholic Church. Denouncing the church for not doing enough to care for the poor, to me, is like a lazy husband criticizing his wife for not spending enough time making dinner because she's so busy doing his laundry, as if making dinner is the only good thing that she has to do, all the while not lifting a finger to help her. I've noticed too that when I visit other impressive landmarks built with a different purpose in mind, there's a conspicuous absence of these kinds of disparaging comments. For example, when I go to a professional sports venue like a stadium or an arena, somehow I don't hear approximately 1 in 10 people lamenting the waste of resources that, instead of being used for the benefit of the poor, is devoted to grown men chasing a ball around so that masses of other grown men can live vicariously through them. And I'm not even criticizing that. I enjoy a good football game or hockey game as much as the next person, but for those who feign this kind of concern for the poor, like this fellow in my tour group, you'd think if he was consistent, he would be making this complaint a lot, like to an insufferable degree. Like whenever he sees resources dedicated to something that seems less important than the cause and the needs of the poor. And yet, I'd be willing he isn't in the habit of doing that. The fact is, the Catholic Church, at her own great expense, curates these treasures of art, design, and history for the benefit of all. It's a service to humanity that the church has always been a great patron of the arts throughout her history, and she continues to nurture such artifacts to this present day. This accusation gets made as if the Pope himself somehow is the exclusive beneficiary of this magnificent deposit of history and beauty, like Oprah is for her own property. But of course, that's not the case. Millions of people visit St. Peter and other Catholic landmarks throughout the world every year, and in our case, those of us who were touring St. Peter's on this occasion, we were doing it for free. Yes, it's an exhibition of wealth and incredible beauty and art, but it's a shared wealth for all to enjoy. And the agitator, the complainer, the protester in this case, was one of the thousands who were benefiting from it on this particular occasion. So sure, we could sell it all off so that it does become the exclusive property of someone like Oprah or Bill Gates, and then no longer a public good, accessible for all to enjoy. And then we might be able to dedicate that money to the needs of the poor and feed them for a day, a week, or maybe even a month. But they would still be poor in the end. As Jesus said himself, we will always have the poor with us. And in the end, humanity will have permanently been deprived of something that was a treasure used in the service of the public's good. And yes, by placing certain people in charge of curating and governing those resources, the church has had to suffer embarrassing scandals and corrupt leaders at times. But think about what the church does to at least minimize this corruption to the degree that she does. It says that as a prerequisite to being placed in a role of leadership over this institution and its assets, you have to be celibate. And in some cases, you have to take a vow of poverty. And the same people who complain about the church's wealth, in my experience, which is held in common for the good of all, are also the same people who will be the first to complain about the church's teachings and practices of celibacy for the clergy. Yet, this is one of the key practices that helps prevent clergy from abusing the position of governance and authority that they can attain to. Like, just think about this for a second. Think about the way that temptation works. All temptations are made stronger when we have some way of justifying it to ourselves, and thus easing our guilt. And those justifications are much more readily available when we have families to take care of. Now, don't mistake what I'm saying. I'm not saying that having a family is a bad thing. I'm just saying that temptations are multiplied when we do have families. How many greedy millionaires out there do you think soothe themselves by saying, I'm not selfish, I'm doing this for my wife and children so that they can have the life that I never had. And then they recite this slogan to themselves every time they make some sort of a shady deal or take advantage of someone. A celibate priest who has no possessions of his own and no family of his own is going to be much more inclined to treat the church's goods as goods for all, goods for the community, rather than exclusively for himself or his exclusive inner circle. So unless the people who make these kinds of complaints are willing to make them every time they encounter some sort of vast expenditure that isn't utterly necessary and could somehow compete with the needs of the poor, then they have no right leveling it at a church who already does more to help those in need than any other organization in the world, and who imposes a staggering degree of restrictions upon their own leaders as a prerequisite to getting any access to curating that wealth so that they can then curate it for generations to come. And for anybody who does make these kinds of inconsistent accusations towards the church, it suggests to me that it has a lot more to do with an irrational hostility and anger and hatred towards God and the church and anyone who aims their lives at him than it does a sincere concern for the good of the poor. Hey, thanks for watching that, especially if you made it this far. If you want to show me some appreciation, you can like and subscribe, or check out my website, brianholdsworth.ca, for other ways that you can support me. You can also check out one of my sponsors, which is Real Estate for Life, who hosts a network of real estate agents who will likely share your pro-family, pro-Christian, pro-life values, which is really important when it comes to making a big decision like buying a home. So check them out at realestateforlife.org.